And we are ready to start. My name is Carol Schall, and I'm the Director of Technical Assistance at Virginia Commonwealth University Autism Center for Excellence. Joining me co-presenting today is Staci Carr. Staci is my great colleague. She is also one of our directors at VCUA's in Technical Assistance, and we're so glad to have you join us this morning. Just a couple of housekeeping issues. We have a full day, a full half day today and another half day tomorrow of our COLA. This is our first time presenting our COLA as a virtual conference. And so each session will have a content tech expert in the chat room and a technical expert in the chat room. This morning, our content experts helping us are Josh Taylor and Karen Berlin. They will be managing the chat. If you have any questions while we're presenting, please type them into the chat bar. You're going to remain on mute throughout our presentation this morning because there's going to be a lot of us meeting this morning, and we don't want to take up a lot of time with a lot of talking. In addition, Terry Blankenship and Lucian Friel are our technical experts, and so if you run into any technical difficulties, they're going to be the folks in the chat that can help you out with that. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. And there you go. So, a couple of things. You're going to remain on mute in large sessions, but some of our sessions will be using breakout rooms. Some of our sessions will be using some other ways for you to interact with each other. And so we are both going to be meeting virtually, and we're going to be providing for some interaction. If you're seeking BCBA credits, you will have to stay through the entire session, and there will be 2 code words that will be presented throughout the session for you to make note of. If you have a question, you're going to use your chat bar, and that is the little icon at the bottom of your screen that looks like a cartoon bubble. Just click on that and type your chat in. We're going to be recording this so that we can present this again later. By participating, you are consenting to be recorded, but we will be editing the sessions and the recording to maintain your privacy. And so here we go. Our topic today is trauma and its impact as you return to school after the COVID-19 crisis. And so let's start with just an definition of trauma. Trauma is the response to a deeply disturbing event. And I think all of us can relate to this right now, because when COVID-19 hit, and on March 13th, when we were all told to stay at home, and really stay at home, restaurants closed, stores that you went to closed, places that you might go to have fun closed, you had this overwhelming sense of helplessness. And you felt a sense that your safety was in danger. Well, that's trauma. And the thing is that trauma is inevitable. We all at some point in our lives will experience trauma. And so it's not, is someone experiencing trauma, but how do we address trauma so that as that person experiences trauma, they actually can grow through that experience? Now, in addition to COVID-19, we've also seen a number of our students and their families experience financial hardship. We literally shut down our multi-trillion-dollar economy in a matter of days. And so that led to tremendous family stress within the home. And then, as if to add stress upon stress upon stress, we've seen tremendous amounts of racial tension this summer. And so there's no other way to describe it than a trauma triple whammy. I think, whenever I go into a grocery store, I'm aware that my safety is at risk. Whenever I'm watching television, I'm aware that my brothers and sisters in the world are at risk just by being who they are. And so that traumatic sense of not feeling safe has really, really impacted us at this time. And so I think this statement is pretty accurate at this point. As you plan for your return to school, every child, youth, and adult has experienced some level of trauma due to our current situation. And that's something we really have to pay attention to. We cannot just open up school as if it was just a long, happy break and we're so glad to see you. Now, make no mistake, you're going to be glad to see your students, but the trauma of the current situation is going to impact them. There's also a whole area of looking at trauma from the perspective of developmental disability. In fact, there's an awful lot of data suggesting that individuals with intellectual and developmental disabilities, including those with autism, are much more prone to trauma. And that's because of the lived experience of individuals with disabilities. Individuals with disabilities are actually much more prone to be victims of crime just in general. And you can see that 3 times more likely to be raped or sexually assaulted than their peers without disabilities. 4.6 times more likely to be robbed. And that's even in school. I mean, you think of, what it's like for a person with a disability in school to have their lunch money robbed from them, or to have something taken from them while they're on the bus. 3.2 times more likely to be victims of aggravated assault, which is the felony level of assault. That is real harm caused to the person. And then 1.9 times more likely to be victims of simple assault. On top of that, there's a lot of data that the earlier a person requires intensive medical procedures or hospitalization, the more likely they are to have experienced trauma. We then add to that the experience of exclusion. The actual feeling of being excluded from your peer group is neurologically the same as being assaulted. There have been lots and lots of studies that have looked at the way the brain responds to being left out or excluded, and the same centers of the brain that light up when you have been physically hurt also light up when you've been excluded. And so the action of being excluded is actually traumatic in and of itself. You add to that a number of our students with disabilities have at some point in their lives experienced restraint and seclusion. Consider what it's like for a young person with autism to have watched the horrid examples of restraint that have happened over this summer with the situation with George Floyd. And consider that if that young individual has been restrained themselves on the floor, how traumatic that might be, how much that might raise a post-traumatic response. Then finally, so many of our youth with disabilities have been teased and bullied. All of this is to say that our individuals with disabilities are more prone to experience trauma on a regular basis. And yet we frequently don't address that issue as we support them in our classrooms and in our schools. And so let's talk a little bit more about the actual physical impact of trauma, which is really important for us to take a look at, because trauma literally, physically changes your brain. And it begins at a cellular level where the cells themselves shorten. The telomeres, or the dendrites that reach out, shorten in the presence of trauma. And then the neurotransmitters begin to change. And when the neurotransmitters change, what that does is that changes the reactive response the individual has to the event. These changes result in immune system changes. And so if my cells are changing, if my neurotransmitters are changing, I now become more vulnerable to illness. And that illness then becomes a type of trauma in and of itself. Individuals who have seizure disorders frequently under trauma will experience more seizures. And that's a traumatic. So what we see is trauma layered on trauma, layered on trauma. And that becomes really problematic. We see that the toxin elimination becomes impacted in the body. Hormones change in that cortisol and ghrelin increase, which actually increases the body's stress reaction. We see neuropathways change, neurotransmitters, brain waves. The end of this, and from the bottom up, the downstream effect is an actual change in the brain architecture. I want to insert a short story here and tell you how this looks in the life of an individual with autism. There was a young man who I worked with for years and years and years, very dear friend now, who whenever he was stressed or upset as a young man, as a adolescent, even now as a worker, whenever he's stressed, he starts rocking and tapping his shoulder and saying, "Poor baby broke his leg." Well, one of the very first most traumatic incidents in his life was when he fell off his back porch and in fact did break his leg. And now that was when he was 3. He's now in his 40s and he still carries forward the effects of that trauma. And whenever he's in a confusing situation, it's almost like a PTSD, a post-traumatic stress disorder reaction to experiencing that stress, where he remembers his mother cradling him and holding him and patting him and say, "Oh my God, my poor baby broke his leg. My poor baby broke his leg." And so that trauma lives on in that young man for the rest of his life. And that's important for us to pay attention to. There's also the psychological impact of trauma. We've just talked about how the brain changes, but there is a tremendous psychological impact that we must pay attention to. Specifically, the very first thing that goes after a traumatic event is the loss of a sense of safety. And so one of the things that you've always worked on as good teachers, good educators, good coaches to your school systems is making the classroom a safe place for individuals with autism. And so you've used a lot of visuals, you've used a lot of strategies to help the person calm, you've provided sensory breaks that help that person know that they're safe in the classroom. Well, now they're coming back after COVID, and they're going to have to learn a whole new set of behaviors that will feel very strange and distressing, like wearing a mask, staying far away from people, making sure that you don't touch somebody else's pen or pencil, or you don't somehow physically interact with others. You won't be allowed to hug. And so that sense of safety that you've worked so hard to establish is going to be disrupted. People who have undergone trauma lose their sense of danger cues. We try to teach children to really pay very close attention to danger cues and really respond to them. But once you've gone through trauma, that part of your body, that part of your neurological system begins to turn off because you're overwhelmed. There's a loss of trust and a sense of shame that can be overwhelming. What did I do to cause this? Why do I have to stay in? Why can't I go to the store or to the park? Why can't I hug my grandmother, my grandfather? That shame really does impact the individual. For folks who have experienced sexual trauma or sexual abuse, there's a loss of intimacy, a loss of understanding how to relate to others in a healthy way. And that's something that we really need to pay attention to. Often to cope, people actually disassociate. And that's a fancy psychological term for just saying, I turn myself off so that I can cope with this moment. I'm going to go to the grocery store and not pay attention to the fact that, 30, 40 people in here could make me so sick that I would die. I'm just going to pretend that that's not a thing. And once we disassociate, it becomes a coping strategy all the time, and we begin not to attend to ourselves. That can lead to a loss of actual physical connection with my body. So I might not notice that I'm not feeling well. I might not notice that I have a headache, or that I'm not my best, and I just try to push on through. That leads to a true loss of a sense of self, a real sense of being in touch with who you are, how you respond to others, how you feel. And from that comes a loss of self-worth. If I don't know how I feel, I don't know what I'm good at. I don't know how to respond in this world. Finally, a lot of folks who have undergone trauma experience a real sense of reenactment. They continually go back to and replay in their heads the moments of the trauma that were most salient to them. There's actually a behavioral construct for this. So for those of you who are BCBAs, this is your BCBA part in this little talk this morning. We often use and talk about operant conditioning, right? A, B, C, antecedent behavior consequence, or stimulus response consequence. And in education, and especially in autism, we've used stimulus response consequence to teach. But what happens when trauma occurs is we move from that operant conditioning into classical conditioning. And so let's take the example of an assault. Maybe I'm getting on a subway in Washington, D.C., and as I get on, someone grabs and steals my purse, okay? And that's a traumatic event. So I love my purse. I got my purse in Italy when my daughter was a student there. I associate that purse with really warm, wonderful things, classically conditioned to become a source of happiness for me. My purse has my money. My purse has everything that I want. If I want to go get an ice cream, I reach for my purse. If I want to call a friend, I look in my purse for my phone. So my purse has all kind of classically conditioned positive associations. Then somebody takes my purse. That classical conditioning flips. And so now any new purse that I get is going to become associated through classical conditioning with that trauma. And so that when we understand that, we can begin to see how the operant sits on top of those reinforcers that are classically conditioned. My purse is a reinforcer. It's a secondary reinforcer because it's become associated with all these positive things. But there's that one moment of trauma where it became inextricably associated with negative experiences. And so from now on, when I choose a purse, that's always going to play into my choices. And I might re-experience that little bit of trauma every time I pick up a purse. That's a small example of how that behavioral connection happens. We're going to go to breakout rooms. And this is both for the purpose of you having a discussion, but also for the purpose of you kind of learning the breakout room system. You're all on mute right now. When you go to your breakout room, you'll still be on mute. So you will have to unmute. And the way you do that is to open your bar. You're going to move your mouse at the bottom. When you get to your breakout room, you'll be able to unmute. Before you go to your breakout room, you're going to see a pop-up screen on your screen telling you what room you've been assigned to. You're just going to click on that invitation and you're going to wait a minute or two. Then you're going to magically be zoomed to your breakout room. Once you're there, unmute yourself. Introduce yourself. No one's going to be there to tell you to start talking. So you're going to be there with about 3 other people. So introduce yourselves. And then you're going to begin talking about the question. Okay? The question you're going to talk about is, we've talked about the physiological and psychological impacts of trauma. Now, what do you think the behavioral changes you might see? What are the ways that you will see trauma in your students when you return to school? My very good content expert, Karen Berlin, is now going to assign you. Welcome back. I think folks are finding their way back, and hopefully we didn't lose anybody. I think we might need our tech folks to make sure that everybody's still on mute, except for the presenters. And hopefully you can see the screen. So here is a long list of behaviors associated with trauma. But I wanted to show you even a list that might even help you a little more kind of process some of the behaviors. I know in my breakout room, we talked about we're expecting a lot of behaviors that maybe were extinguished or were addressed previously and have been long gone to come back. But trauma behaviors cluster around these 4 areas. First of all, we're likely to see more avoidance. And avoidance is like a function. And so when you think of avoidance, that might be active avoidance, where a student actually resists, physically resists, making changes in their routine, going to places. You might see more kids resisting even coming to school. And then we also see a lot of alterations around arousal and reactivity, which might include individuals like really very quickly, very short fuse, flying into a tantrum with the most minor stress. Because remember, that stress is added on top of all of the other stresses. So you might see really high reactivity to antecedents that might cause real problems. You might see changes in cognition or mood. And then there are going to be intrusive symptoms. And the way we describe intrusive symptoms when we think about trauma is sleep disturbances. So the students that you serve might come to school much more tired, or they might have experienced just a lot more stress. So you might see a lot more stress behaviors, like obsessively making sure that my backpack is put away, or obsessively making sure that everything is in its right place, or I have to have my lunch with me all the time because I fear that if somebody touches my lunch, I might get sick. And so those are the behaviors that you might see. At this point, Staci is going to take over, and she's going to present more on what we should do about this. So Staci, you're up.
All right, so as Carol mentioned, a lot of the behavioral symptoms that we see with trauma responses. But what does that look like for students with autism? And, you know, one of the big things that we see is diagnostic overshadowing. And that's another psychological term that means, I don't know, what is it? What is it? Is it autism? Is it anxiety? Is it depression? Or is it an actual trauma response? And so we're going to have to be really thoughtful about taking data, about really communicating with parents about what their time at home was like. And we'll talk about strategies on how to do that in a few slides. But similar to individuals without ASD, we're going to see a lot of kind of intensity, as Carol mentioned, with perhaps aggressive behavior, self-injurious behavior, maybe concentration problems, and the sleep difficulties. I know that with my own children, their sleep pattern has completely been flipped around. So getting back into the swing of things is going to be challenging for students with autism. And you know that when they come to school tired, you're going to see very short fuse, as Carol said. You're going to see more tendency to want to nap in a beanbag, perhaps. And, you know, without the supports at home or without the structure ahead of time, we're really going to have these challenges. And so, as Carol said, this is going to be like an exacerbation of some of the symptoms that you saw prior to them leaving in March. Okay, so there's only one don't, and that's the big thing here. Don't punish behavior that's because of trauma. And I just said, we're not sure what it is. Is it autism? Is it depression, anxiety, or trauma? But here's the rule. Don't punish that behavior. We can shape the behavior. We can put in some supports to make sure that we're really supporting the students as they re-enter the school environment, whatever that may look like across the state. Okay, so what does this look like in your classroom? Some of the things that may have been in place before you left, like a bat cave sensory room or a sensory separate classroom, that might not be able to take place because of making sure that it's clean, making sure that there's adequate supplies for cleaning. So we have to be thoughtful about this. We still need to create that safe physical and emotional space in your classroom, but that can also look like time, whether it's time away from an activity or maybe a separate place in the school that is, you know, of course, 6 feet apart and what have you. One of the things that you might want to consider is really looking at a sensory profile for your students. There are a lot of great tools, and we can certainly share those with you, that have parents and teachers look at what those sensory hypersensitive reactions are and those under sensory reactions are. And instead of having that space in the classroom that everyone's going to go to and you're going to be worried about keeping it clean, you can develop a sensory box that has some of those strategies and tools in it that's specific to each student. That way, it's theirs. You can clean it for them and nobody else will have access to it. So that will really take away some of that nervousness about, oh, do I have to clean this? And it also gives some peace of mind to the student who may be very rigid about, nobody can touch this because this is mine. Or someone else can't go into the sensory room because I want to go in there. So really having that special box for them might be a great idea. Establish predictability. We know this. But what is it going to look like now is probably very different than it did before you left. But one of the things that you might want to consider once your school division has a plan for re-entry is putting those things in place and sharing it with families. So whether it's a video of what the school is going to look like, because there might be hand sanitizing stations. It might be special places where lunch is going to be now, or how things are going to be delivered for the student. And maybe doing videos, visual supports, looking at how those nuances of recess are going to be different, or how the person who always was in their same class might not be there now. So having that predictability ahead of time before going back to school, and then providing parents tools on how to present that to their students. And it might be a useful strategy to meet with the parent via Zoom. Everyone Zooms, right? So we can provide those resources and then coach our families on how to support their son and daughter upon reentry. Establish trustworthiness. Follow through on those promises. So I know that a lot of young adults that I've been meeting with recently are very concerned about getting coronavirus, and they don't want to leave the house. And they're very concerned about other people not wearing their masks. And you can also hear in their voice, like the pressured speech of the trauma of what happens if I go to a store and other people aren't wearing their masks? What's going to happen to me? And some of that is, we know that 6 feet apart is appropriate. We know that when we're outside, we don't necessarily have to wear masks. But in a lot of people's minds, that information's not there. And it's really hard to get around that. So establishing that trustworthiness that, no, I'm protecting you, and this is how we're doing this for our school and for you. Offer choices. This is COVID-19 or not, trauma or not, choice is important and very empowering. If a student is given choices, they are so much more able to connect, to feel motivated, to feel a sense of control. If you think about the choices that you are given each day, if you were not afforded those choices and were told specifically everything that you had to do, from what you were going to wear to what you're going to eat to where you're going to sit, you would feel increased anxiety. So providing simple choices really will help a student kind of get that control back and feel a part of the environment. Stay regulated and practice regular emotional and sensory regulation activities. There are tons of great resources out there. Mention the sensory boxes, and we will certainly share that in an email to everybody or in our Google Drive, but also things like zones of regulation or something similar where people can check in and you can ahead of time figure out where they're coming from. And this is great for all students, not just students with autism. So if this is in an inclusive setting, this is something that would be great for everybody, because everybody's going to have a sense of trauma coming back, including teachers and administrators, because we're not sure what's going to happen. So having that time to have that emotional check-in will alleviate a lot of guesswork for everybody. So ECHO is a fantastic resource. And one of the great posters that you can print off are the do's and don'ts. And this is basically what I just said, but this is something that you might want to print off and share with teachers, post around the school, give to administrators, because it gives you kind of some rules about quick and easy things that you can do to really alleviate the stress for everybody who enters the school, whether they have autism or not. Carol's our advancer of the slides, so sorry for the delay. Okay, so what should we do? What should we do for our friends with autism? We need to, oh boy. I can't speak that quickly. So this is another poster, and it's a great visual representation of what I'll talk about in the next slide. Create safety. Of course, we talk about the classroom being a safe environment. And as Carol's talked about before, that safe environment is all turned upside down. So there might be different desks or fewer desks, or there might be less things on the wall, or those comforting things that once were there can't be there. That's why specific sensory modulation boxes would be perfect for this situation. Regulating the nervous system. Allow for breaks, allow for time before activities. You can get up and walk around, you can take some time outside, you can move in the classroom perhaps. Building and connecting with relationships. So those friendships and relationships that were perhaps there back in March, it's been a very long time. So you need to reestablish that and spend some time on building the rapport and making sure that everyone feels safe and connected in your classroom. And that's in your self-contained classrooms and your inclusion classrooms and your co-taught classrooms and any classroom. You have to take that time to build that rapport again and create that safe environment. Develop a coherent narrative that you're going to, it's going to be your like elevator speech about what you're going to say to your students about COVID-19, about expectations in school, about safety, about how you're going to support your students. And that could be something that all teachers kind of have that elevator speech so that everyone's hearing the same message. I know that there's the rumor mill that happens, especially in middle and high school. So it's important that everyone's on the same page so that it can support our students who may hear those things and then spiral and think about all the things and the emotional stress that might come about with their own safety. And then fostering post-traumatic growth. And the next few slides will be talking about that. So what can we do specific to autism? I love this wordle, rapport, build rapport, connect, listen, identify what is the trauma or the feelings that students are having when they re-enter. You might want to take a little bit more time building rapport. Sometimes we spend the first week of school getting to know each other, but we might have to do that for an extended period of time. We might have to take time each day to do those check-ins, to feel how people are entering the school, to understand how their engine is running and how they're feeling. Capitalize on those special interests. We just had a lunch and learn about special interests, and these are those kind of quirky, unique things that people really are connected to. And sometimes they can be intrusive, but this is a time to really connect on those and use them for motivation, use them for conversation, and use them as a way to build safety and security. We already know that we use clear, simple instructions. That's something that we do anyway, but pair those with visual supports. Even for folks who can read, that visual support might provide that little bit of extra comfort that would be important to get through their day. I mentioned this before, but really reaching out to caregivers and getting their support and their input, because they're feeling the same stress and anxiety and trauma that their sons and daughters do. So finding out what they've been doing over the summer break, finding out what their routines have been, finding out what they've said about the trauma that's been happening in the world, and taking time to listen to each parent's unique perspective. And it's going to look very different across the Commonwealth. So taking that time and putting that perspective into your teaching is going to be important. I think I've said sensory about 472 times, but I'm going to say it again. Sensory component of autism. We know that the sensory system is dysregulated. So whatever we can do to provide more supports in that area will be very, very important. And of course, above all, reinforcement. Even for the simplest things. Thank you for wearing your mask today. Look at you with your Superman mask. How awesome. You are keeping yourself safe and other people safe. Look at you washing your hands. That's amazing. Thank you for not touching your face. All those important reinforcement strategies we used to do 4 to 5 times for every 7. It must be even more. We have to do it more and more and more, because that'll provide that sense of relief and sense of feeling safe. So how do we grow through trauma? Brutally honest optimism. So make this plan, make it now. Well, make it as soon as your school division determines what it is. And then making sure that you put all the supports in place and share that with your families ahead of time. Share it with your students ahead of time. I know students can, when they're entering school, go ahead of time and look around the school. That might not be an option anymore. So making a virtual video of what the school looks like, what the different places look like, what the classroom's gonna look like, where their seat is going to be. Providing those structures and those visual supports now can ease some of that stress and tension upon coming back to school. We know that change in routine is difficult, so we have to prepare for that. We don't know if there's going to be a resurgence of COVID-19, and if we're going to have to then go back to a more restrictive situation. So think about that ahead of time and prepare for if that's going to happen. the perception of control over environments or events. So this is a choice thing again. If a person can have choice about whether they use a pen or a pencil, whether they do a worksheet of math or math on the computer first, whether they can read a passage and then write, or write and then read, all those little tiny pieces of control can really relieve a person of stress and anxiety. Cope through acceptance and positive reinterpretation. Keep calm and wash your hands. Well, that's my humor and optimism, because we have to find the light in things. At least I do. Optimism is important. So if we go into the school and we have the sense of dread and sense of this is not how it used to be, and how horrible is this? Students can pick up on that. So we really have to provide that sense of everyone's here, we're happy to see everybody, we're gonna get through this, keep washing your hands, but we have to carry on. We have to move on and think about our students' education, their social experiences, and how to progress, even though they've missed a whole slew of interaction and education. Just develop a strong sense of self, and that's for you. So what is your purpose in teaching, in how you're going to educate your students, in how you're going to interact with them? And think about every day, this trauma that we've talked about, your own trauma with these situations, and how it's been impacting your families and your students. And just keep thinking about that, not in a perseverative way, but just to keep that in the back of your mind when you're looking at your students' behavior, when you're looking at some things that you don't understand what's going on. Consider that perhaps it is trauma, perhaps it is the sense of what's going to happen next, and keep that in the back of your mind as you teach, as you educate, as you carry on. All right. Carol's going to help me with the discussion in Google Slides. She is the wizard at this.
So what's going to happen next is we're going to do some brainstorming in Google Slides. We're going to post a link in the chat box, and Karen is doing that, I think, as I speak. I'm going to ask you to copy that link by clicking on the chat box and just copying the entire link that Karen just posted. You're going to minimize your screen. Make sure that you press the dash or the yellow circle. Do not press the X. We're just minimizing. You're going to open your browser, paste the link into your browser, and go to the Google Slides. Once you're there, you're going to be able to type into this in real time. Now, there's going to be 10 slides that look exactly like the picture on the right side of the screen. These little colored Post-it notes are where you can type. What you're going to do is you double click on one of those Post-it notes and you can type into that. There's about 150 of you today, and if you all start typing on the first slide, there's not going to be enough room. There are 10 of these. So be sure to pick a different slide so that you have lots of room to type. The question we want you to consider is, what can you do in your classrooms and schools to provide trauma-informed supports on your return to school? We will let you know when it's time for you to come back. We're going to save this document, and we're also going to post this as a PDF into your Google folder so that you can access this in the future. We're going to get at least 152 people to give us ideas of what we can do. Okay? So now's the time for you to minimize your screen and to go to your Google slide.
Thanks, Carol.
So Carol, this is Karen, and this is a technical difficulty on my end. I don't have the link for that.
Okay, I will stop share. And I'm not going to stay there. Screen sharing has stopped. Let me go to the link. And I'm going to share the link right now myself.
Are you putting it in the chat box?
Yeah, I'm going to put it in the chat box
Thanks.
right now. And if I could figure out where the chat box is, the link is going in right now. So just copy that, paste that, and I'm going to share the Google slide. As you add to it, you'll be able to see your contributions.
Thank you for that help.
Wow,
Sorry
people are
about,
already putting stuff in. Fantastic.
and you guys are great. You're moving across the slides.
Good work, everybody.
Excellent. We will clean this document up so that everybody's various contributions can be seen.
This should
Provide
be a
video.
very, oh, sorry.
Go ahead,
This should
Staci.
be a very robust list that we will put in the Google Drive once we clean it up so that you all can have these tools for you to move ahead in the next school year.
Someone has an idea for a hands-on fun lesson to teach social distancing. Hands-on and social distancing are almost oxymorons, but
Carol,
I like it.
weren't you talking about the hats with the noodles
Yes.
in China?
Yeah. Videos and procedures of what to expect.
Fantastic.
Oh, there's a great idea. Somebody has label items very clearly, so it's easy to find them and you don't have people digging through various drawers. It's going to take some real organization, isn't it? That's great.
There might be a run on label makers.
Yeah.
Put your Amazon order in now.
Video chats with parents and students prior to school starting to establish relationships. That's a great idea. Mask on and mask off signs for when to wear them and when to take them off.
Fantastic.
Oh, really good idea. Let's see, the sensory boxes, I see that again. Support staff through their trauma as a model. And you know, this is a time when we as special educators have a lot to offer our colleagues in general education. They are not as adept at dealing with the behaviors that they may see.
And I think taking time to be kind to each other is important too.
Yes.
Some folks are having some difficulties not being able to type into the box.
Okay, remember to double click on the box and then you will see the cursor and you can begin to type.
If that still doesn't work, you might try reloading the page. That's what I had to do the first time around because so many people are active in it.
Here's minimal demands and provide lots of pairing with reinforcement. I think if I move that box a little. Lots, yes. Reestablish trust and new routine, and choices are going to be key to that. Modeling desired behavior. Provide predictability. There's just tons of great ideas. Share detailed reopening plan with all staff and parents. The hardest thing that we're all dealing with right now is we simply don't know what this is going to look like. And I think that level of uncertainty is hard for all of us.
Exactly. We'll give this a couple more minutes.
This is really a good one. And this is so important as well. Space for teachers to have their concerns validated. You know what?
Very nice.
We're all worried. And the more you are traumatized, the more you're going to communicate trauma to your students.
That's a really good point.
Color-coded items is a really good idea to help the classroom maintain what's mine and what's other people's, so that I don't grab onto it. If any of you are still having trouble typing into the document, you can always type into the chat as well, and we will be able to capture that. Tape on the floor as visual for spatial needs. That's going to be really critical for all of us, I think. I really appreciate it when I'm at a grocery store. And if somebody else is not particularly adept at following those cues, I know that I just have to leave. I can adjust based on that. So, you know, spend some time in Walmart, Target, your grocery store, and you'll see that tape everywhere. Complete new preference assessments. Good idea. These kids have been out for a while and they've learned new things. Really good ideas here, Staci.
Yes, I'm very excited about this.
This will continue to be available to you throughout the rest of the presentation, so you can keep typing in. But Staci, would you like to go back to your presentation?
Yes, please.
Okay, actually we are at the live chat portion.
Fantastic. So this is the time for Karen, if there are questions in the chat box, if you could please let us know.
Yeah, so a few people use the chat box to make contributions to the Google Slides, and one was to use a countdown strategy to teach the mask wearing to increase endurance wearing it.
It's a great idea.
Great idea. There were a number of questions about the materials because it was such an awesome presentation. So if you look in the chat box, the link to the materials is posted there for you. Some of you went to the Google Slides using that link. And you will get, to just give you a little bit of orientation to the conference in general, you should have received, or you will be receiving, an email with a Zoom link for each session. But as far as the content, the two of you provided such a comprehensive and helpful session in a very compacted amount of time that people seemed to be with you the whole time. There weren't any specific questions to what you shared. There are a few more contributions. They're taping spaces for Summer Academy, so they're taping off the spaces using painter tape, using life skills classes to do some of the trauma skill teaching. So people can look in the chat box, but no, I think if you want to wrap up, you're good.
Great.
And any of the, oh, sorry, Carol.
Go ahead, Staci.
Some of the information about sensory boxes and sensory strategies, we'll add that to the Google folder as well. I've had a great opportunity working with adults in a day placement on building those sensory kits. And so we can share that information too.
The other thing is we have recorded this session, and the entire session will be available for you to view again, should you desire, or if you want to share it with some of your colleagues at work who might need a refresher in trauma. At this point, I think we are exactly at 10 o'clock according to my Apple Watch, which means I missed my stand time. High five, yes. I missed my stand time, but it has been delightful to start the morning with you. I think you all have your links for the next sessions, and we look forward to seeing you in and out of sessions as we go. Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Carol and Staci. And I think on this topic, just a warm welcome to all of our participants. And I think thinking about supports related to trauma, there is a great sense of comfort and positivity when there is some normalcy and routines that stay the same. So if you can all nod your appreciation to ACE and the TTACs for maintaining this conference and doing the work to migrate it from face-to-face time to virtual. We're just so pleased to be able to learn from all the experience and expertise shared today. So enjoy your break. Thank you, Staci and Carol, and be sure to check your link for your next session.
And hey, this is the first COLA where we don't have parking problems.
Ooh.
We'll see you in the next sessions, everyone. Thank you.